The late afternoon sun cast golden shadows across the marble floors of the Al-Rashid estate in Dubai, where 62-year-old Margaret Sullivan stood with her worn leather suitcase, wondering if she'd made the right decision. After 35 years teaching special education in Boston, followed by a devastating loss that left her widowed and searching for purpose, she'd accepted a position as a specialized nanny for a child with profound visual impairment. The agency had been vague about the details, mentioning only that the family was prominent and the little girl, Layla, had been blind since birth. What they hadn't mentioned was the breathtaking opulence of this modern palace, the stern-faced household staff who regarded her with barely concealed skepticism, or the palpable grief that seemed to permeate every pristine corner. Margaret had raised 3 children of her own, worked with hundreds of visually impaired students, and thought she'd seen every variation of human struggle. But nothing had prepared her for the haunted eyes of Khalid Al-Rashid when he finally appeared in the foyer, a 58-year-old billionaire whose traditional white kandura couldn't disguise the weight of sorrow he carried, whose brief handshake conveyed both desperate hope and resigned defeat. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said in impeccable English, touched with a British accent from his Oxford education, "my daughter has been examined by 17 specialists across 4 continents. They all say the same thing. There is nothing medically wrong with her eyes. The blindness is complete, permanent, and inexplicable." His voice cracked almost imperceptibly on the last word. "But I have read your credentials, your work with children who have neurological visual impairments. If there is even the smallest chance—" He didn't finish the sentence. Couldn't, and Margaret saw in that moment not a billionaire, not an imposing figure of Middle Eastern wealth and power, but simply a father who would trade everything he owned for his child's sight. She squared her shoulders, feeling something awaken in her that had been dormant since her husband Thomas died 2 years ago. Purpose, determination, and the stubborn Irish conviction that sometimes the answer everyone seeks is hidden in plain view, waiting for someone willing to truly see. Margaret's first encounter with 4-year-old Layla happened in the nursery on the estate's 3rd floor, a room that managed to be both lavishly appointed and heartbreakingly practical. Every surface was padded, every corner rounded, every toy designed for tactile exploration rather than visual delight. The little girl sat in a pool of afternoon light that streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Persian Gulf, her small hands moving across a set of textured blocks with methodical precision. She wore a simple pink dress, her dark curls pulled back with a ribbon, and when Margaret entered, those unseeing eyes, large, luminous, and the color of warm honey, turned toward the sound of footsteps with an alertness that seemed almost contradictory to her condition. "Hello, Layla," Margaret said softly, deliberately making her approach audible, her shoes clicking on the marble in a steady rhythm. "My name is Margaret, but you can call me Maggie if you like. I'm going to be spending time with you, helping you explore the world in new ways." The child's face remained impassive for a long moment, then tilted slightly, as if considering not just the words, but the timbre, the accent, the intention behind them. "You sound sad," Layla said in English, her voice clear and unexpectedly perceptive for one so young. "Like Baba. Everyone here sounds sad." Margaret felt her throat tighten, both at the observation and at the casual way the child had identified an emotion Margaret thought she'd been concealing. She knelt beside Layla, close enough that the girl could sense her presence, and spoke with the honesty she'd always employed with children. "You're right, sweetheart. I lost someone very special to me not long ago, and sometimes that sadness still lives in my voice. But do you know what else lives there? Hope. Because I've spent my whole life helping children like you discover that the world is full of wonders, even when we experience them differently than others do." She reached out slowly, telegraphing her intention, and gently took one of Layla's small hands. "Would you like to tell me what you can sense right now in this very moment?" The child's fingers, delicate but surprisingly strong, curled around Margaret's with a trust that felt both premature and profound. "I can feel the sun on my face," Layla began, her voice taking on a dreamy quality. "It's warm but not hot today. I can hear the fountain in the courtyard. It makes different sounds depending on how the wind blows. Right now, the wind is coming from the water because I can smell salt. And you, she paused, her free hand reaching up to touch Margaret's face with a gentleness that made the older woman's eyes sting with unshed tears. You smell like flowers and old books, and your hands are soft but with little rough places on the fingers, like you write a lot. And you're not afraid of me like the others are. Margaret blinked rapidly, astounded by the child's observational abilities, the rich sensory world she'd constructed in the absence of sight. But it was that last observation that struck deepest, the recognition that the household staff, perhaps even Khalid himself, approached this precious child with a fear wrapped in pity, a hesitation born of not knowing how to bridge the gap between their world and hers. I'm not afraid, Layla. I'm fascinated. You notice things most people miss entirely. Now, would you show me your favorite place in this big house? As they stood, Margaret made a mental note to review every medical report, every test result, because something in the way Layla had turned toward the light, the way those honey-colored eyes had tracked the source of Margaret's voice, suggested possibilities the 17 specialists might have overlooked. The days fell into a rhythm as Margaret integrated herself into the Al-Rashid household, though she quickly discovered that navigating the family dynamics was more complex than any curriculum she'd ever designed. Khalid's mother, Amina, a formidable woman in her 80s who wore traditional abayas in rich jewel tones and ruled the household with exacting standards, regarded Margaret with initial suspicion that gradually softened to grudging respect. "You are not like the others," Amina said one afternoon, as they took Arabic coffee together, a ritual the matriarch had initiated as a test of Margaret's adaptability. "The previous nannies treated my granddaughter like fragile glass, speaking in whispers, moving as if the very air might shatter her. You treat her like a child who happens to be blind, not a blind child who happens to be alive. There is a difference." Margaret sipped the cardamom-scented coffee, accepting the observation as the compliment it was intended to be. "In my experience, Mrs. Al-Rashid, the greatest disability is often the limitations others impose through their own fear or ignorance. Layla is extraordinarily capable. She just experiences capability through different channels." Amina's eyes, still sharp despite her age, studied Margaret with an intensity that felt almost intrusive. "My son has not been the same since his wife died giving birth to Layla. Nadia was the light of his life, and I think he sees his daughter's blindness as divine punishment for some unnamed transgression. He loves Layla desperately, but that love is poisoned by guilt he cannot name and grief he will not release." The older woman set down her delicate cup with a click that sounded like punctuation. "He needs someone to remind him that life continues, that joy can exist alongside sorrow, that his daughter deserves a father who looks at her with hope rather than regret. I am too close, too much a part of his grief. But you understand loss without being consumed by it. I see it in how you move through the world, carrying your sorrow like a companion rather than a chain." Margaret felt exposed by this assessment, recognized with some discomfort that Amina had perceived truths about her that she'd barely acknowledged herself. "I'm here for Layla," she said carefully, aware that she was navigating cultural and familial territories where missteps could be costly. "My role is to help her develop skills and confidence." Yes, Amina waved a ring-laden hand dismissively. "But in helping the child, you will inevitably affect the father. That is simply how these things unfold. I am merely observing that you are perhaps the first person to enter this house in 4 years who is not diminished by the sadness that lives here. You bring something different, possibility perhaps, or simply the perspective of someone who has survived grief and emerged intact, if changed." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tell me truthfully, Margaret Sullivan, in your professional opinion, after these weeks of working with my granddaughter, do you believe the doctors? Do you truly think there is no hope for her vision?" It was the question Margaret had been avoiding, the observation she'd been documenting in her private notes with increasing urgency, and the reason she'd requested a private meeting with Khalid that very evening. "I think," Margaret chose her words with extreme care, "that there are things about Layla's condition that don't align with conventional blindness. I think the human eye and brain are more complex than 17 specialists might fully comprehend, and I think it's possible, just possible, that everyone has been looking for the wrong answers to the wrong questions. Amina sat back, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth, and Margaret had the distinct impression she'd just passed some crucial test whose parameters she hadn't fully understood. The meeting with Khalid took place in his private study, a room that balanced modern luxury with traditional Middle Eastern aesthetics, hand-woven carpets from Persia, calligraphy-inscribed walls, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes in Arabic, English and French, and a massive desk of polished zebra wood that somehow managed not to feel ostentatious. Khalid stood when Margaret entered, his traditional white thobe and red-checked gutra giving him an air of dignified authority that his perfectly tailored Western business suits never quite achieved. "Mrs. Sullivan, please sit." He gestured to a leather chair positioned across from his desk, though Margaret noticed he chose to sit beside her rather than behind the imposing desk, a choice that felt deliberate, an attempt to make this conversation more collaborative than hierarchical. "You requested this meeting. I assume it concerns Layla's progress." His voice carried both hope and trepidation, the tone of a man who'd learned to expect disappointment but couldn't quite extinguish the ember of possibility. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I need to show you something." Margaret pulled out her tablet, where she'd compiled weeks of observations, videos and notes. "I've been documenting Layla's responses to various stimuli, and there are patterns here that concern me, not because they suggest her condition is worsening, but because they don't match the profile of congenital blindness as described in any of the medical reports I've reviewed." She pulled up the first video, showing Layla in the garden. "Watch her head movements when birds fly overhead. See how she tracks. The sound, yes, but also how there's a split-second anticipation before the sound reaches her. And here," she advanced to another clip, "when we're reading tactile books, her pupils dilate and contract in response to light levels, even though she shows no conscious awareness of the light itself. That's autonomic, Mr. Al-Rashid, which means her optical nerve is processing information at some level, even if her conscious brain isn't interpreting it as vision." Khalid leaned forward, his entire body taut with attention, and Margaret saw his hands tremble slightly as they gripped the armrests of his chair. "Are you saying the doctors were wrong? That she's not truly blind?" His voice cracked with an emotion so raw it was painful to witness. Margaret held up a cautioning hand, knowing how desperately he wanted hope, but also knowing the danger of offering false promises. "I'm saying that the human visual system is incredibly complex, and that blindness exists on a spectrum far more nuanced than simply can see or cannot see. There's a condition called blind sight, rare, not fully understood, where the visual cortex is damaged, but the eyes and optical nerves function. Patients can respond to visual stimuli without consciously perceiving them. Then there's cortical visual impairment, where the eyes are perfect, but the brain doesn't process the signals correctly. What I'm suggesting is that Layla might be experiencing something in between, something the conventional tests didn't capture because they were looking for traditional blindness markers." She paused, meeting his intense gaze directly. "I think we need to try something different. Not another round of standard ophthalmology, but neurological imaging combined with experimental visual therapy techniques. I have a colleague at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Sarah Chen, who specializes in pediatric neurological vision disorders. She's pioneered some revolutionary approaches. But, Mr. Al-Rashid, I need you to understand that this might lead nowhere. It might simply confirm what 17 specialists have already told you. I don't want to offer false hope." Khalid stood, walked to the window overlooking the illuminated gardens, and when he spoke his voice was thick with suppressed emotion. "Mrs. Sullivan, Margaret, for 4 years I have lived with certainty, certain that my daughter would never see my face, never watch a sunset, never read a book with her eyes. Certainty, I have discovered, is a kind of death. What you're offering is not false hope. It is simply hope, unmodified. And that, I realize now, is something I've been too afraid to feel. When can we contact your colleague?" The process of arranging consultations with Dr. Chen revealed unexpected depths to Khalid's character that Margaret found both surprising and oddly moving. Within 48 hours, he'd not only secured an appointment at Johns Hopkins, but had arranged for his private jet to transport the specialist's entire diagnostic equipment to Dubai, along with Dr. Chen herself and her research team. "If Mohammed will not go to the mountain," he said with a self-deprecating smile, when Margaret expressed astonishment at the logistics, "then the mountain must come to Mohammed and bring all its high-tech machinery with it. I have learned that money, while insufficient to purchase happiness, is remarkably effective at eliminating obstacles." They were walking through the estate's gardens, Layla between them, holding both their hands, when he made this observation. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and frangipani, and the little girl was humming softly to herself, completely content in a way Margaret had rarely witnessed indoors, where the household's anxiety seemed to permeate the very walls. "Baba, what's a mountain?" Layla asked, her question emerging from the humming without warning, demonstrating the acute listening skills she'd developed. Khalid knelt beside his daughter, his kandura pooling in the grass, and Margaret watched his face transform with the kind of tenderness that made her heart ache. "A mountain is very, very big, Habibti," he said, using the Arabic endearment that meant "my beloved." "Bigger than our house, bigger than the tallest building in Dubai. It reaches up so high that its top touches the clouds. The rocks are rough and cold, and often covered in snow. Do you remember how ice feels when we let you touch it?" Layla nodded enthusiastically, her hands moving expressively as she processed this information. "But why would Mohammed not go to it? Is he afraid of heights?" The innocent question made both adults laugh, the sound startling Margaret with its rarity and richness, and Khalid's eyes met hers over his daughter's head with a warmth that created an unexpected flutter in her chest. "It's just an expression, sweetheart," Margaret explained, finding her voice slightly unsteady. "It means that when something is difficult to reach, sometimes you have to find a creative solution, a different way to approach the problem." She felt Khalid's gaze linger on her, and when Layla skipped ahead to investigate an interesting texture in the garden path, he spoke quietly, intimately, in a tone she hadn't heard from him before. "I owe you an apology, Margaret. When you first arrived, I was not welcoming. Amina took me to task for my coldness, reminded me that hope deferred makes the heart sick, but hope renewed is a powerful medicine. I had stopped believing anyone could help Layla, had armored myself in resignation. You've spent a few weeks with my daughter and noticed what 17 specialists missed in years of examination. You've brought light to this house, not just for Layla, but for all of us. For me." The confession hung between them in the jasmine-scented air, and Margaret felt something shift in her understanding of this complicated, grieving, passionate man. He wasn't just a billionaire, wasn't just an Arab patriarch, wasn't just a client-employer. He was a father fighting for his child, a widower learning to live again, and, she recognized with some surprise, a man whose presence made her remember she was still a woman with desires and dreams beyond professional accomplishment. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived like a whirlwind of efficiency and enthusiasm, a 45-year-old Korean-American neurologist whose diminutive stature belied her towering reputation in pediatric visual neuroscience. Margaret had worked with her on 2 previous cases during her teaching career and had always appreciated Sarah's refusal to accept impossible as a diagnosis. The examination she conducted over 3 intensive days was unlike anything the Al-Rashid household had witnessed. Not the cool clinical assessment of previous specialists, but an engaged, almost playful investigation that treated Layla as a collaborator in solving a puzzle. "Okay, little detective," Sarah would say, conducting tests that looked more like games than medical procedures. "I'm going to show your eyes something surprising, and I want you to tell me if you feel anything. Not see, just feel anywhere in your body. Maybe a tingle, maybe warmth, maybe just a sense that something changed." Layla, who'd grown wary of doctors, responded to Sarah's approach with delighted cooperation, and Margaret found herself holding her breath as sophisticated imaging equipment painted real-time pictures of the child's brain activity. On the third evening, Sarah called a meeting in Khalid's study, her expression carefully neutral, in that way medical professionals employ when they have significant news but aren't certain whether it's good or bad. Margaret sat beside Khalid on the leather sofa, acutely aware of how his arm pressed against hers, how his breathing had become shallow with anticipation. Amina occupied a chair to their right, her prayer beads moving through her fingers with unconscious rhythm. "I'm going to start with the finding that will sound worst, but is actually quite good news," Sarah began, pulling up images on a large monitor. "Layla's optic nerves are not only intact, they're remarkably healthy, better than average actually. The issue isn't in the eyes themselves, which every previous examination confirmed. However, and this is the crucial discovery, there is a very small lesion in her visual cortex, specifically in the area that processes conscious sight perception. It's incredibly subtle, which is why it didn't appear on previous scans. It's not a tumor, not progressive, likely the result of oxygen deprivation during birth." She paused, letting this information settle before continuing. "Now here's where it gets interesting, and where Margaret's observations were absolutely critical. Despite this lesion, Layla's brain has created alternative pathways. Her subconscious is processing visual information, just not in a way she's consciously aware of. That's why she can track movement she doesn't see, why her pupils respond to light she doesn't perceive, why she navigates spaces with an intuition that seems uncanny. Her brain is seeing, but the signal isn't reaching her conscious awareness." Khalid's hand found Margaret's, gripping it with crushing intensity, and she squeezed back, understanding that he needed this anchor. "Can it be fixed?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's expression shifted to something more hopeful. "Potentially, yes. There's a new therapeutic approach, using a combination of neurofeedback, targeted visual stimulation, and neural plasticity training. Basically, we'd be teaching Layla's brain to recognize and consciously process the visual information it's already receiving subconsciously. It's experimental, success rates are around 40%, and it would require intensive therapy over 6 to 12 months. Even with success, we don't know how much functional vision she'd gain. It could be anywhere from light perception to nearly normal sight. But for the first time, Mr. Al-Rashid, I can tell you with medical certainty, your daughter is not irreversibly blind. There is hope, real and quantifiable hope." The words hung in the air like a benediction, and Margaret felt Khalid's shoulders shake with silent sobs, years of held grief and desperate longing, finally finding release. The decision to proceed with Dr. Chen's experimental therapy was immediate and unanimous, though the implementation proved more complex than anyone anticipated. Sarah proposed establishing a specialized facility at the Al-Rashid estate, bringing in equipment and a rotating team of specialists, rather than disrupting Layla's life with extended hospital stays. "Consistency and comfort are crucial," she explained. "We're essentially rewiring neural pathways. That happens more effectively in an environment where the child feels safe and engaged." The project transformed an entire wing of the mansion into what Sarah dubbed the Visual Discovery Center, a space that balanced medical precision with child-friendly warmth. Margaret found herself working 18-hour days, coordinating between the medical team, managing Layla's responses to the new routines, and, increasingly, serving as an emotional touchstone for Khalid, whose hope and terror seemed to exist in equal warring measures. "What if this doesn't work?" he asked one night, finding Margaret in the newly equipped therapy room where she was reviewing the next day's protocol. It was nearly midnight, and his formal attire had given way to casual linen pants and a simple shirt, his feet bare in a display of vulnerability she found unexpectedly intimate. Margaret looked up from her notes, seeing in his face the raw fear that lurked beneath his public composure. then we'll have tried everything humanly possible, and we'll help Layla build the fullest life she can with the vision she has, which frankly is already remarkable. But Khalid, she used his first name deliberately, acknowledging the shift in their relationship that had occurred gradually over recent weeks. I genuinely believe this will work. Not because I'm an optimist, but because I've seen what Layla can do, how her brain is already adapting and creating new pathways. Sarah's therapy isn't creating something from nothing. It's just helping make conscious what's already happening unconsciously. He moved to the window, and she joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders touched, looking out at the illuminated gardens. I keep thinking about what you said the first day we met, about hope being a companion rather than a chain. I'm trying to hold this hope lightly, to not let it consume me with expectation. But Margaret, I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a precipice, and I'm either about to fly or about to fall, and I don't know which terrifies me more. Without thinking, Margaret reached for his hand, the gesture feeling both completely natural and thrillingly transgressive. You're not alone on that precipice. Layla has an entire team supporting her, and you have... She paused, suddenly aware of what she'd been about to say, the boundary she was about to cross. You have people who care about both of you very much. He turned to face her fully, his free hand rising to cup her cheek with a tenderness that made her breath catch. I have you, he said simply. These past weeks, watching you with my daughter, seeing how you've brought not just expertise but joy, curiosity, love. Margaret, you've become essential to this household, to Layla, to me. And I find myself terrified of that too, because I thought I was done with these feelings, done with wanting companionship and partnership, and he stopped abruptly, seeming to catch himself, propriety and caution warring with what looked like genuine longing. Margaret knew she should step back, should maintain professional boundaries, should remember all the reasons this was complicated and potentially problematic. Instead, she leaned into his touch, acknowledging the truth they'd both been circling. I didn't come to Dubai looking for this. I came because I needed purpose after loss, because I thought dedicating myself to helping a child was the only kind of meaningful connection I had left to offer. But Khalid, being here, knowing you, watching you love your daughter with such fierce devotion, it's reminded me that hearts can be both broken and whole, that grief and joy can coexist, that maybe, just maybe, second chances are real. The kiss, when it came, was soft, tentative, seasoned with the kind of careful hope that comes with age and experience, and when they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears. The therapy sessions began with deceptive simplicity. Layla, seated in a specialized chair, wearing a cap fitted with sensors that monitored her brain activity while she engaged with carefully calibrated visual stimuli. We're starting with the most basic elements, Dr. Chen explained to the assembled household on day one. Light and dark, simple shapes, high contrast patterns. The sensors will show us when her subconscious brain registers visual information, and then we'll use neurofeedback, essentially a game-like reward system, to help her conscious mind recognize and acknowledge what her subconscious already knows. Margaret sat beside Layla, holding her hand, while Khalid and Amina watched from observation seats, barely breathing. On the monitor, Layla's brain activity displayed as colorful waves and peaks, and when the first stimulus appeared, a bright white circle on a black background, those waves shifted in specific patterns that indicated visual processing, even though Layla herself reported seeing nothing. That's perfect, Sarah encouraged. Your brain saw it, sweetie. Now we're going to help the rest of you catch up. The first 2 weeks yielded small but measurable progress. Layla began reporting vague sensations she described as feelings when visual stimuli appeared. Not sight precisely, but an awareness that something had changed in her environment. It's like the air gets warmer or thicker. I can't explain it, she told Margaret one afternoon, after a particularly intensive session. But I know when something appears, even though I can't see it. Margaret documented these observations meticulously, sharing them with Sarah, who grew increasingly excited. She's developing conscious awareness of visual input, even if she can't yet interpret it as seeing. This is exactly what we hoped for. Her brain is building the bridge between unconscious and conscious processing. It's remarkable. Margaret, I've never seen a patient respond this quickly. The praise should have filled Margaret with professional satisfaction, and it did, but she found her joy complicated by the increasing complexity of her relationship with Khalid, which had evolved into something neither of them had quite named, but which felt increasingly impossible to ignore. They'd fallen into a pattern of late-night conversations in his study or the garden, discussing Layla's progress, but also, increasingly, their own histories, losses, hopes. Khalid spoke of his late wife Nadia with a fondness that held no bitterness, describing her as the first chapter of my heart story, complete and beautiful, but finished. He talked about the pressure of managing a business empire built on his family's oil wealth, but which he diversified into technology and renewable energy, driven by a desire to leave a legacy beyond extraction and consumption. I want Layla to inherit a company that builds futures, not just depletes resources, he said. I want her to see, whether with her eyes or through other means, a world that her father helped improve. Margaret, in turn, shared stories of her own 3 children, now scattered across America with families of their own. Her 40-year marriage to Thomas, a jazz musician who taught high school music and filled their home with melody until pancreatic cancer had stolen him with cruel swiftness. I thought I was done with romance, she admitted one evening. Thought that part of my life had closed with Thomas, that I'd had my great love and should be grateful for that. But being here, with you, feeling this connection, Khalid, it terrifies me because it feels like betraying his memory, but it also feels like honoring what he'd want for me, which is to keep living fully. Khalid took her hands in his thumbs tracing circles on her wrists. Nadia used to say that love isn't a finite resource, that giving love to new people doesn't diminish what we gave to those who came before. I'm only now beginning to understand what she meant. Margaret, what's happening between us? I don't want to rush it, don't want to complicate the work you're doing with Layla, but I also don't want to pretend it isn't real, isn't growing stronger every day. They sat in charged silence, both aware they were approaching a decision point that would change everything. The breakthrough came in week 6, during what had seemed like a routine therapy session. Layla was working with increasingly complex patterns, combinations of shapes and colors that her subconscious brain could clearly process, as evidenced by the sensor readouts, when suddenly she gasped, her small body going rigid with shock. Something's different, she whispered, her voice trembling with an emotion that might have been fear or wonder or both. It's not just a feeling anymore. It's like there's something in front of me, but it's not touching me, and I know its shape even though I'm not feeling it with my hands. Is this seeing? Sarah's professional composure cracked into pure jubilation. Yes, Layla, that's exactly what seeing is. You're perceiving the visual information consciously now. Can you tell me what shape you see? Layla's face scrunched with concentration, her hands clenching Margaret's with almost painful intensity. It's round, like a circle, but also bright. Is that a right word? It feels bright. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at the monitor, which showed Layla's brain activity spiking in patterns that indicated integrated visual processing, not just subconscious recognition, but conscious perception. Khalid, who'd been in a business meeting and had rushed to the therapy room when alerted by staff, arrived in time to witness his daughter describe her first visual perception in language she'd never used before because she'd never had the experience to describe. He stood frozen in the doorway, his face cycling through disbelief, hope, and devastating joy. And when Layla called out, "Baba, is that you? I can feel you here, but it's different now. There's a tall shape where you are, and it's moving." He collapsed to his knees, pressing his hands to his face as sobs racked his body. Margaret wanted to go to him, to offer comfort, but she couldn't leave Layla, whose excitement was mingled with confusion and a touch of fear at this new way of experiencing the world. Amina, however, moved to her son's side, kneeling beside him despite her age, whispering in rapid Arabic that Margaret couldn't fully catch, but which sounded like prayers of thanksgiving mixed with gentle admonishments to pull himself together for his daughter's sake. The session ended after another 20 minutes, during which Layla successfully identified shapes, perceived light and dark contrasts, and began to describe the overwhelming strangeness of having visual input after 4 years of purely tactile and auditory reality. "It's too much," she said finally, fatigue evident in her voice, "like when we went to the beach and all the sounds were so loud I had to cover my ears. This is too much seeing. I need to stop." Sarah immediately powered down the equipment, praising Layla's self-awareness and explaining that this was normal, that her brain needed time to adjust to processing visual information unconsciously. As Margaret carried the exhausted child to her bedroom, Layla murmured against her shoulder, "Maggie, am I going to be different now? Will I still be me if I can see?" The question pierced Margaret's heart with its profound wisdom. "You'll always be you, sweetheart. Seeing is just another way of experiencing the world you've already been exploring in your own beautiful ways. It doesn't replace what you know. It just adds to it." Layla seemed satisfied with this answer, snuggling deeper into Margaret's embrace. "Good, because I like who I am. I just want to add seeing to all the other things I can do." As Margaret tucked her into bed, she marveled at the resilience and self-possession of this extraordinary child, and understood why both Khalid's love and her own had been so easily captured. The celebration that evening was subdued but profound, marked by Khalid's insistence that the household staff who'd supported them throughout the journey share in the champagne and traditional Arabic coffee, toasting not just to Layla's breakthrough, but to the team effort that had made it possible. Margaret found herself swept into conversations with people she'd barely spoken to before. The gardener who'd carefully maintained paths with specific textures so Layla could navigate independently. The cook who'd created meals with strong aromatic profiles to help the child experience food richly. The housekeeper who'd meticulously maintained the spatial organization Layla had memorized. "You see," Amina said, appearing at Margaret's elbow with uncanny timing, "a household is not just a place where people live. It is an organism, each person a cell contributing to the whole body's well-being. What you've done extends beyond medical intervention. You've reminded us all that hope is not weakness, but strength, that love without expectation of reward is the purest kind." She patted Margaret's hand with surprising affection. "Now, I must speak to you about something important, and I will do so directly, as is my way. My son is in love with you. Do not look so shocked. Everyone sees it except perhaps you and him, though even your denial is becoming quite transparent." Margaret felt heat flood her face, torn between the urge to deny everything and the realization that denial would be both futile and dishonest. "Mrs. Al-Rashid, the situation is complicated. I'm Layla's nanny. There are professional boundaries, cultural considerations," and Amina cut her off with a dismissive wave. Yes, all very concerning if you were 25 with stars in your eyes and no sense of proportion. But you are a woman of 62 years who has lived a full life, buried a husband, raised children, earned professional respect. My son is 58, widowed 4 years, desperately lonely despite all his wealth and power. You are both adults of sound mind and judgment who have found something rare and precious. So tell me, what is this complication you speak of? That you work for him. This can be adjusted, that you are American and he is Arab. My own sister married a British man and they had 40 happy years together before his death. That Layla might object. She adores you more than anyone save her father. So please explain to this old woman what makes such happiness so impossible." Margaret opened her mouth, closed it again, and found herself laughing despite the seriousness of the conversation. "You've thought through every objection I haven't even fully articulated," she admitted. "But Mrs. Al-Rashid, Amina, what if I'm just a transitional figure, someone who represents hope and change and newness? And once Layla's vision is restored or stabilized, once the crisis has passed, what if what Khalid feels for me is just gratitude masquerading as affection?" The older woman's expression softened with something like sympathy. Now we approach the real fear, not the practical complications, but the emotional ones. You are afraid to trust this joy because you've learned that life can strip away what we love most. Your husband's death taught you that lesson, and it is a hard one to unlearn. But Margaret, let me share something I've learned in 83 years. Refusing love out of fear of loss is not protection. It is simply a different kind of loss, one we inflict upon ourselves. My son does not love you because you are convenient or because you represent a solution to his problems. He loves you because you are brave, compassionate, intelligent, and because you see him not as a billionaire or an Arab patriarch or a tragic widower, but as a man capable of growth and worthy of happiness. That kind of seeing, truly seeing another person, is rarer than any diamond in my jewelry collection. She took Margaret's face in her aged hands. Promise me you will not sabotage this out of fear. Promise me you will let yourself be happy, even if happiness comes in unexpected packages and through unconventional paths. Life is too short and joy too rare to refuse when it's offered honestly. Margaret found herself nodding, tears slipping down her cheeks, and when Amina pulled her into an embrace that smelled of rose water and expensive perfume, she finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this extraordinary chapter of her life was real and allowed to continue. Layla's visual development accelerated over the following weeks with a speed that amazed even Dr. Chen's experienced team. What had started as crude shape recognition evolved into color perception, then depth awareness, then, miraculously, the ability to recognize faces, though her vision remained somewhat blurry, like looking through slightly frosted glass. It's likely her acuity will max out around 2060 or 2080, Sarah explained during a progress review. Not perfect, but fully functional. She'll probably need glasses for fine detail work, and her night vision will always be compromised. But Mr. Al-Rashid, your daughter will be able to see faces, read books, watch movies, navigate independently. By any measure, this is a profound success. The formal meeting took place in the presence of medical documentation, legal witnesses, and hospital administrators as Sarah's team prepared to publish their findings as a case study that could revolutionize approaches to pediatric cortical visual impairment. But, for Margaret, the real measure of success came in smaller, more intimate moments. Layla's first time seeing her own reflection, her wonder at discovering that the sky was blue, her delight at finally putting visual images to the voices and textures she'd known all her life. The most powerful moment came unexpectedly one afternoon when Khalid returned from a business trip to Abu Dhabi. He'd been gone for 3 days, the longest separation since Layla's treatment began, and entered through the main foyer where Layla and Margaret were working on a puzzle, the child using her emerging vision to match pieces by color for the first time. At the sound of the door, Layla's head turned, and though her vision was still limited, she could make out the tall figure in traditional white kandura striding across the marble. "Baba!" she cried, abandoning the puzzle to run toward him, and for the first time in her life, she did so with visual confidence, avoiding obstacles, tracking his movement, her path direct rather than cautiously exploratory. Khalid caught her up in his arms, spinning her with abandon, and when he set her down and knelt to be at eye level, Layla reached out to touch his face with both hands. Her eyes, those beautiful honey-colored eyes, focused on his with unprecedented directness. "I can see you, Baba," she whispered. "Really see you. You look just like how you felt, but also different. Your eyes are brown like mine, and you have lines here." She traced the laugh lines around his eyes. "And your smile is so big. Is this what happiness looks like?" Khalid couldn't answer, could only nod through tears, and Margaret, witnessing this moment of pure parental joy, understood that this healing of the bond between father and daughter was worth every complicated emotion and uncertain future she might face. That evening, after Layla had been settled in bed, exhausted but jubilant, Khalid found Margaret in her favorite spot in the garden, a secluded bench surrounded by night-blooming jasmine. He'd changed from his formal attire into casual clothes, and he carried 2 glasses of wine, a gesture Margaret recognized as significant given his usual abstention in deference to cultural norms. "I've been thinking," he began, settling beside her and handing her a glass, "about what happens when the medical team leaves, when the crisis has passed, when life returns to something resembling normal." Margaret's heart began to race, knowing this was the conversation they'd been building toward for weeks. "I've been thinking about that too," she admitted, wondering where I fit once Layla no longer needs specialized care, wondering if, he interrupted gently, taking her free hand in his. Margaret Sullivan, nothing about this situation has been normal from the moment you arrived, and I have no desire for it to become conventional now. What I'm asking, what I'm hoping, is that you'll stay, not as Layla's Nanny, though she'll always need guidance and support, but as my partner, my companion, as someone who shares this life with me in all its aspects, who helps me raise my daughter, who challenges my assumptions, who reminds me that joy and sorrow can coexist. I'm asking you to build a future with me, here in Dubai, or anywhere else you'd prefer, in whatever configuration makes sense for two people who've already lived full lives and are brave enough to begin again. The proposal hung between them, simultaneously expected and shocking, practical and impossibly romantic. Margaret's first instinct was to say yes immediately, to surrender to the joy rising in her chest. But years of teaching had trained her to examine decisions from all angles, especially decisions with life-altering implications. Khalid, I need you to truly consider what you're asking, she said carefully. I'm 62 years old. I have children and grandchildren in America who I see infrequently, but love deeply. I'm set in my ways after decades of independence. I don't speak Arabic beyond basic pleasantries. I'm not Muslim and would need to understand how that affects your family's perception and acceptance. I'm not interested in being a hidden mistress or creating scandal for your business reputation. And, she took a deep breath, I need to know, this isn't gratitude or relief speaking, that in 6 months, when the euphoria of Layla's recovery has settled, you won't wake up and realize you've committed yourself to a foreign woman who doesn't fit neatly into your world. Khalid listened without interruption, his face serious, and when she finished, he nodded slowly. These are all reasonable concerns, and I'll address each one honestly because you deserve nothing less. He shifted to face her more directly, his expression earnest in the moonlight. Your age is irrelevant to me, except that it means you bring wisdom and experience I deeply value. Your children should remain a priority. We can easily travel to America regularly, and they're welcome here any time. My private jet is hardly a pumpkin that will vanish at midnight. As for being set in your ways, so am I. We can be inflexible together, learning to accommodate each other's peculiarities. Regarding language, my mother spoke only limited Arabic with my British stepfather, and they managed beautifully. Love requires communication, but not necessarily linguistic perfection. Your faith, or lack thereof, is between you and whatever higher power you do or don't believe in. I'm Muslim by culture and heritage, but I'm not particularly devout. What matters to me is that you're a good person who treats others with kindness and justice, which you demonstrably are. He paused, gathering his thoughts for what was clearly the most important point. As for gratitude versus genuine feeling, Margaret, I've had months to examine my emotions, to question whether what I feel is simply relief or transference or some crisis-induced attachment. I've consulted with a therapist, actually, because I wanted to be certain I wasn't being reckless or unfair to you, to Layla, to Nadia's memory. What I've discovered is this. Yes, I'm grateful to you for what you've done for Layla, but I'm not in love with you because of that. I'm in love with you because you laugh at my terrible jokes, because you challenge my assumptions about education and parenting, because you have 3 separate reading books going simultaneously and can't remember which plot belongs to which. I love how you hum unconsciously when you're concentrating, how you always smell like lavender and something I can't quite identify, but which drives me wonderfully mad. I love that you cried watching a documentary about elephants and then lectured me for 20 minutes about conservation efforts. I love your fierce independence and equally fierce loyalty. These things have nothing to do with Layla's vision and everything to do with who you are as a person. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with old-fashioned gallantry. But Margaret, I also won't pressure you. If you need time, take it. If you need to return to America to think without the intensity of this environment clouding your judgment, I'll arrange that. What I won't do is pretend. I don't want this. Don't want you. Don't imagine a future where we face whatever comes next together. So think about it. Take whatever time you need and know that whether you say yes or no, my gratitude and respect for you are unchanged. The speech, so earnest and vulnerable, so careful to honor her autonomy while declaring his intentions, broke through her remaining defenses. I don't need time, Margaret heard herself say, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Or rather, I've already had time, weeks of it, questioning and analyzing and trying to talk myself out of feeling what I feel. The truth is, Khalid, I started falling for you the day you knelt in the grass to explain mountains to your daughter, when I saw past the wealth and the formality to the father who'd do anything for his child. I fell further every time you showed up for the therapy sessions, even when you were terrified of hoping. I fell completely when you listened to my stories about Thomas without jealousy, when you understood that my past love doesn't diminish what I can feel now. So yes to staying, to building whatever this becomes, to being brave enough to choose joy, even when it's unexpected and complicated and probably going to involve more cultural adjustment on my part than I can currently imagine. She set down her wineglass and cupped his face in her hands. I'm saying yes to you, Khalid Al-Rashid, to partnership and companionship and probably some spectacular misunderstandings as we figure out how to blend our very different worlds. But mostly I'm saying yes because life is short and love is rare, and I refuse to let fear rob me of either. The kiss that followed was different from their first, less tentative, more certain, flavored with commitment and promise, and the heady relief of a decision finally made. Announcing their relationship to the household proved less dramatic than Margaret had feared, primarily because, as Amina pointed out with characteristic bluntness, everyone already knew and had been waiting with varying degrees of patience for the official confirmation. Finally, the elderly matriarch declared when Khalid and Margaret appeared hand in hand for family dinner, Layla between them chattering about the colors she'd learned to identify that day. I was beginning to think I'd need to lock you both in a closet, like characters in one of those ridiculous American romantic comedies my granddaughter watches. Sit, we're having lamb with pomegranate molasses, and we're celebrating new beginnings. I've already informed the staff that Margaret will be transitioning to a different role in this household, one that involves significantly less child-minding and significantly more co-managing family decisions. She waved away Khalid's attempt to interject. Yes, I know you want to take things slowly, be respectful of proprieties, but Habibti, I'm 83 years old, and I'd very much like to see this family complete and happy before I die. So we'll proceed with appropriate ceremony, but also appropriate haste. Yes? Margaret found herself simultaneously charmed and overwhelmed by Amina's efficiency, a feeling that would become familiar as the older woman began planning what she termed a proper wedding that honors both your traditions. The conversation with Layla came later that evening as Margaret tucked the child into bed, a ritual they'd maintained throughout the medical journey. Layla's room had been gradually transformed as her vision improved, walls painted in soft colors she could now appreciate, picture books added to complement her tactile ones, a nightlight shaped like a crescent moon that provided gentle illumination. Maggie, can I ask you something? Layla said as Margaret smoothed the blankets. Of course, sweetheart. You can always ask me anything. The child's face scrunched with thought, her improving vision focused on Margaret's face with increasing clarity. If you and Baba get married, does that mean you'll be my new mama? Because I had a mama even though I never met her, and I love her because Baba tells me stories about her. But I also love you, and I don't know if I can have two mamas or if that's not allowed. Margaret felt her heart clench with tenderness at the complexity of this child's emotional intelligence, her need to honor both the mother she'd never known and the maternal figure who'd become so central to her life. Oh, Layla. Margaret settled onto the edge of the bed, taking the child's small hands in hers. You can absolutely have two mamas. Your birth mother, Nadia, will always be your first mama, the woman who gave you life and who loved you even before you were born. Nothing and no one can ever replace that or make it less special. What I'd like to be, if you're comfortable with it, is your second mama, the one who gets to watch you grow and learn and discover all the amazing things you're capable of. Some children have one parent, some have two. 2. Some have many people who love them in parental ways. There's no limit on love, sweetheart. Your heart is big enough to hold both memories of Nadia and new love for me, and that doesn't diminish either one. Layla considered this, her face solemn, then brightened with a smile that transformed her features. So I get extra love, like having bonus dessert. Margaret laughed, delighted by the analogy. Exactly like bonus dessert. And sweetheart, I promise to tell you stories about your birth, Mama, too, to make sure you know about the woman who gave you life. Your Baba has shared some wonderful memories with me, and I think you should hear them all. Layla threw her arms around Margaret's neck, hugging with the fierce intensity only children can muster. I'm glad you're staying, Maggie, Mama. I like seeing your face now that I can, and I want to see it every day forever. As Margaret returned the embrace, she thought about the unexpected paths life takes, how grief can lead to joy, how endings can become beginnings, how a professional assignment can transform into the family she hadn't known she was still seeking. The months that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment, celebration, and occasional cultural collision that tested everyone's flexibility and sense of humor. Margaret's children, 2 daughters and a son, all married with children of their own, flew to Dubai for an extended visit, ostensibly to meet Khalid and assess their mother's new situation, though Margaret suspected they were equally motivated by curiosity about the luxurious estate and their mother's unlikely romantic development. "Mom, you're dating a billionaire," her youngest daughter Sarah said with a mixture of awe and amusement during a private mother-daughter conversation by the pool. "Like an actual billionaire with a private jet and servants and a house that could fit our entire neighborhood. How is this your life?" Margaret laughed, understanding the surrealism her daughter felt. "Trust me, sweetheart, I ask myself that question daily, but you have to understand, Khalid isn't defined by his wealth for me. He's a kind, thoughtful man who makes terrible puns, who cries at sappy commercials, who reads bedtime stories to Layla with different voices for each character. The money is just circumstantial background noise." Sarah gave her mother a long look, then smiled. "You're happy, really happy, in a way you haven't been since Dad died. That's what matters. The rest is just exotic seasoning on an already good recipe." The meeting between Margaret's children and Khalid was both endearing and slightly awkward, as Khalid, normally confident in any business or social situation, became almost shy in the face of their scrutiny. "Your mother is an extraordinary woman," he told them over an elaborate dinner Amina had orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign. "I hope you know that I have no intention of trying to replace your father's role in her life or yours. What I'm offering is companionship, partnership, and a commitment to make her as happy as she's made my daughter and me." Margaret's eldest daughter, Catherine, a no-nonsense attorney, regarded Khalid with the kind of intense assessment she probably used on opposing counsel. "Mr. Al-Rashid, my mother dedicated her entire life to teaching, to children with special needs, to service and care for others. She deserves someone who will put her first for once, who will prioritize her happiness, who understands what a rare and precious person she is. Can you honestly tell me you're prepared to do that?" Khalid met her gaze without flinching. "Yes, absolutely, and without reservation. Your mother has spent her life giving. I want to spend the rest of mine ensuring she receives care, respect, love, and joy in equal measure to what she's given others. That's not a burden or obligation. It's a privilege I don't take lightly." The tension broke as Margaret's son, David, ever the peacemaker, raised his glass. "Well, I, for one, vote we accept this guy. Anyone who can handle Catherine's cross-examination without flinching has my respect. Plus, have you seen Layla? She's adorable, which means we get a new niece, which means our kids get a new cousin. I'm calculating the upside here, and it's pretty significant." The table erupted in laughter, and Margaret caught Khalid's eye, seeing in his expression relief mixed with genuine affection for this complicated, loving, slightly chaotic family she'd brought into his organized world. Later that night, after her children had retired to the guest wing and Layla had been tucked into bed, Khalid and Margaret walked through the moonlit gardens. his arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. "Your children are wonderful," he said. "Strong-willed, intelligent, protective, exactly as I'd expect given who raised them. I was terrified. They'd hate me, think I was taking advantage of their recently widowed mother, or object on cultural grounds." Margaret squeezed his hand. "They loved you, though they'll make you work for their full approval, because that's what families do. But Khalid, watching you with them tonight, seeing how hard you tried to honor Thomas's memory, while also being honest about your feelings for me, it meant everything. You're giving me permission to love again without guilt, and I can't thank you enough for that gift." The wedding planning became a fascinating exercise in cultural negotiation and compromise, with Amina championing traditional Arab customs, Margaret's daughters insisting on certain Western elements, and the bride and groom themselves trying to create something that felt authentic to their unusual circumstances. "What if we do 2 ceremonies?" Khalid proposed during one particularly heated planning session where Amina and Catherine had reached an impasse over whether the event should be gender segregated according to conservative Arab custom. A private, traditional Islamic ceremony for family and close friends, followed by a larger mixed celebration that incorporates both our traditions. That way we honor everyone's expectations without forcing anyone to participate in rituals that feel uncomfortable or inauthentic. The suggestion was met with surprised approval from all parties, and Margaret marveled again at Khalid's diplomatic skills, his ability to find solutions that transformed either-or conflicts into both and possibilities. The planning proceeded with new energy, Amina throwing herself into designing traditional elements, elaborate henna patterns, gold jewelry, embroidered fabrics, while Margaret's daughters researched readings and music that would resonate with their mother's spiritual but not religious sensibilities. Layla became obsessed with her role as flower girl, a designation that delighted her as her. Improving vision allowed her to appreciate the colors and beauty of the botanical elements she'd be scattering. "I want purple and orange flowers," she announced, with the absolute certainty of a child who'd only recently discovered color and had strong opinions about it. "Because purple is royal and orange is happy, and you and Baba should be both." Margaret found the logic irrefutable and instructed the wedding planner accordingly, amused by how this child's unique perspective was, shaping every aspect of the celebration. The guest list grew to include Margaret's extended family from Boston, several former colleagues and students, Khalid's business associates from across the Middle East and Europe, and, surprisingly, Dr. Sarah Chen and her entire research team, whom Khalid insisted should attend as honored guests. "You gave me back my daughter's sight and indirectly brought Margaret into my life," he told Sarah. "That merits far more than a professional. Thank you. Consider yourselves part of this family's story now." The generosity of spirit behind the invitation moved Margaret deeply. This evidence that Khalid understood how lives interweave, how every person who touches our journey deserves acknowledgement and celebration. The night before the wedding, Margaret experienced a moment of pure panic. Standing in her room surrounded by the elaborate gold-embroidered wedding gown Amina had commissioned, the henna patterns still drying on, her hands, the reality of what she was about to do hitting her with overwhelming force. Catherine found her mother sitting on the balcony, tears streaming down her face, and settled beside her with the kind of calm presence she'd inherited from her father. "Talk to me, Mom. What's happening in your head?" Margaret struggled to articulate the tangle of emotions. "I'm terrified I'm being selfish, that I'm choosing my own happiness over I don't even know what. Your father's memory, my identity as a teacher and widow, the simpler life I understood. I keep thinking, who am I to have this second chance at love when so many people never get even one? And what if I'm not enough for Khalid, not sophisticated or cultured or young enough to—" Catherine interrupted gently. "Mom, stop. Just stop. You're enough. You're more than enough. And Dad would be furious if he thought his death had become a prison that prevented you from living fully. Remember what he used to say? Life's too short for regret and too long for loneliness. He'd want this for you. Hell, he'd probably like Khalid. They both share that terrible sense of humor and that deep kindness that makes it impossible not to love them." Margaret absorbed her daughter's words, feeling something loosen in her chest. "When did you become so wise?" she asked through tears. Catherine smiled. I learned from the best. Now let me tell you what I see when I look at you and Khalid. Two people who've lived enough to know that love is rare and precious, who choose each other with full awareness of all the complications and challenges, who approach this marriage not as starry-eyed kids, but as mature adults building a partnership. That's not selfish, Mom. That's brave. It's choosing life over mere existence, joy over safety, possibility over certainty. So tomorrow, you're going to put on that ridiculously beautiful dress, walk toward a man who looks at you like you hung the moon, and you're going to say yes to happiness. Because you deserve it, because Layla deserves a complete family, and because love, real, tested, chosen love, is the best legacy you can leave for all of us. Margaret pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, grateful beyond words for the family that surrounded her, for children who'd become wise adults, for the circle of love that was expanding rather than contracting. Thank you, sweetheart, for understanding, for supporting this, for being the kind of person who celebrates other people's happiness. Your father and I did something right with you three. Catherine laughed. You did everything right, Mom. Now let's get you married to a billionaire. I'm still processing that part, but I'm here for it. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the Dubai sky a brilliant azure that seemed to bless the proceedings. The private Islamic ceremony took place in the estate's formal reception hall, transformed with traditional decorations, intricate geometric patterns in gold and cream, low seating with embroidered cushions, the scent of oud and rose permeating the air. Margaret wore the traditional gold-embroidered gown with surprising comfort, the heavy fabric somehow feeling appropriate for the solemnity of the occasion. Khalid looked magnificent in formal Arab wedding attire, a cream-colored bisht over his white thobe, his gutra held in place with an ornate agal, and when their eyes met across the gathering of immediate family, the connection between them felt almost tangible. The imam conducting the ceremony spoke in Arabic, with the translator providing English simultaneously, and Margaret found herself unexpectedly moved by the rituals, the asking of consent, the signing of the marriage contract, the prayers for blessing and prosperity. When Khalid took her hand and spoke his vows in careful English, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, she felt the weight of tradition and the excitement of new beginnings merge into something transcendent. Margaret Sullivan, you came into my life when I had stopped believing in new chapters, when I thought my story had been written and all that remained was to live out the remaining pages in comfortable resignation. You showed me that stories can have unexpected plot twists, that characters can grow and change regardless of their age, that love is not a finite resource but a renewable energy that expands, to fill whatever space we make for it. I promise to honor your independence, to support your dreams, to laugh with you in joy and hold you in sorrow, to raise Layla as our daughter together, and to build a partnership based on mutual respect, honest communication, and the kind of deep friendship that makes all of life's adventures more meaningful. I choose you today and every day as my companion, my love, my home. Margaret barely managed her own vows through tears, speaking of second chances and unexpected grace, of finding love in the midst of purpose, of gratitude for a man who saw her completely and chose her anyway. When the imam pronounced them married and Khalid lifted the delicate veil from her face, the kiss they shared was witnessed by both families with approval, Catherine and her siblings beaming with happiness, Amina dabbing her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, and Layla, in her role as junior witness, clapping her hands with uninhibited joy. The second ceremony, held in the gardens as the sun began its descent, was a celebration of pure joy and cultural fusion. Margaret had changed into a simpler Western-style wedding dress, while Khalid had traded his traditional attire for an impeccably tailored suit, and they stood under an arch of those purple and orange flowers Layla had insisted upon, surrounded by 200 guests representing the full diversity of their combined lives. The ceremony was brief, readings selected by Margaret's children, music played by a small ensemble combining Arabic oud with Western strings, vows renewed with additional personal promises they'd written together, but it was the reception that truly showcased what they'd created. Tables mixing Arab and American guests in deliberate integration, food that spanned cultures from Boston clam chowder to lamb mansaf, music that transitioned seamlessly from Fairuz to Sinatra and back again, toasts delivered in multiple languages that all conveyed the same essential message. Love transcends boundaries, and happiness deserves celebration regardless of how or where it's found. Margaret danced with Khalid to The Way You Look Tonight, his hand warm on her back, his voice soft in her ear as he whispered, "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being brave enough to choose this life with me. Thank you for making me believe in possibilities again." She pulled back to look at his face, this man who'd become her husband, her partner, her unexpected joy, and replied with absolute certainty, "Thank you for finding me, for seeing me, for loving not just the parts I show the world, but the complicated, messy, imperfect reality of who I am. This is exactly where I'm meant to be." The honeymoon was postponed by mutual agreement, not out of lack of desire for time alone together, but because both Margaret and Khalid wanted Layla to feel included in this new family configuration, to understand that their marriage enhanced rather than threatened her place in their hearts. Instead, they took a family trip to Margaret's hometown of Boston, showing Layla the Atlantic Ocean, so different from the Persian Gulf, the Freedom Trail, with simplified explanations of American Revolutionary history, and Margaret's former school, where colleagues and former students threw an impromptu reception that brought Margaret to tears. "These are my people," she told Khalid, watching him interact with teachers and administrators, with former students who were now adults with children of their own, all of whom wanted to express their gratitude for Margaret's impact on their lives. "This is where I came from, who I was before I became part of your world. I needed you to see this, to understand that I'm bringing my whole self to our marriage, not just the parts that fit conveniently into your life." Khalid pulled her close, his arm secure around her waist. "I'm honored you're sharing this with me, and Margaret, you're not leaving this behind. You're adding to it. We can return here as often as you want. Your people can become our people. Family expands, it doesn't replace." The return to Dubai marked the beginning of what Margaret thought of as their new normal, learning to navigate daily life as a married couple, while parenting a child who was still adjusting to her dramatically improved vision. Layla's acuity had stabilized at 20/70, good enough for independence. In most situations, though, she wore corrective glasses for reading and detail work. More importantly, her entire worldview had transformed. Where she'd once navigated the world through sound and touch, she now experienced it through all her senses simultaneously, and the resulting richness sometimes overwhelmed her. Margaret and Khalid worked as a team to support these adjustments, creating routines that honored both Layla's need for structure and her desire to explore her expanded, perceptual universe, answering endless questions about colors and distances and visual phenomena, helping her integrate her previous understanding of the world with this new way of experiencing it. "You know what's weird?" Layla said one evening during family dinner, a new ritual they'd established. "I thought seeing would make everything easier, but sometimes it makes things more confusing. Like, I used to know exactly how things felt, and that was enough. Now I know how they look and how they feel, and sometimes those don't match what I expected, and my brain has to figure out which one to believe." Khalid and Margaret exchanged glances, recognizing profound wisdom in the child's observation. "That's actually a very mature insight, Habibti," Khalid said. "Sometimes having more information makes decisions more complex rather than simpler. What matters is learning to trust yourself, to integrate all the different kinds of knowledge you have. What you see, what you feel, what you hear, what your experience tells you, into a complete understanding. Your brain is remarkably good at that. You just need practice." Margaret added, "And sweetheart, it's okay to close your eyes sometimes, to rely on your other senses when sight becomes overwhelming. Your vision is a gift, but so are all your other abilities. You get to choose how you experience the world, which combination of senses feels right for each situation." Layla considered this, then smiled with the kind of radiant joy that never failed to make both adults' hearts swell. I like that. I get to choose, just like you chose to marry Baba, and Baba chose to marry you, and we all chose to be a family together. The simple statement carried unexpected emotional weight, and Margaret found herself blinking back tears, marveling at how this child's perspective consistently cut through complexity to essential truths. Later, as she and Khalid prepared for bed in the master suite they now shared, he pulled her into an embrace. We did something extraordinary, you and I. We took broken pieces, my grief, your loss, Layla's blindness, and created something whole and beautiful. I keep waiting to wake up and discover this is temporary, that happiness this complete can't last. Margaret kissed him softly. Then we'll just have to keep choosing it day after day, making it real through our commitment to each other and to the life we're building. That's how happiness lasts. Khalid, not through luck or magic, but through conscious, persistent choice. 6 months into their marriage, Margaret and Khalid received unexpected news that would test their newly formed family bonds in ways none of them anticipated. Dr. Chen contacted them with a research opportunity, a major medical conference in Vienna where she wanted to present Layla's case as a breakthrough in treating pediatric cortical visual impairment with the family's permission and participation. It would mean travel, media attention, potentially becoming the public face of hope for thousands of families dealing with similar conditions, Sarah explained during a video call. I wouldn't ask if I didn't think the potential benefit outweighed the invasion of privacy. But Layla's case could literally change how we approach these diagnoses, could prevent other children from spending years in unnecessary darkness. The decision is entirely yours, but I wanted to offer the opportunity. The request sparked intense family discussions. Khalid's instinct was to protect Layla's privacy, to shield her from public scrutiny and the pressure of being a medical miracle. Margaret understood his caution, but also saw potential benefits, teaching Layla that her experience could help others, showing her that challenges overcome can become sources of strength and purpose. Amina, surprisingly, sided with Margaret. The child is already extraordinary. Better she learns now to use that extraordinariness for good than to hide it away like some shameful secret. The deciding voice, as it should have been, was Layla's own. When they explained the situation in age-appropriate terms, she listened with the serious concentration that characterized her most thoughtful moments, then asked a series of questions that revealed sophisticated understanding. Would other kids who can't see get to see because of what happened to me? Like, would doctors learn how to fix their eyes? 2. When Margaret confirmed this was the hope, Layla nodded decisively. Then we should do it, because I remember what it was like before, when everything was dark and I couldn't see Baba's face or the purple flowers or the way sunlight makes patterns on the floor. If other kids could see those things because I talk about my eyes at a conference, then that's good, right? That's helping people. Her simple moral clarity settled the matter, and within weeks, the family was preparing for their first public appearance as advocates for pediatric visual neuroscience. The conference itself was overwhelming. Hundreds of medical professionals, television cameras, interviews with medical journalists. But watching Layla describe her experience to rapt audiences, seeing Khalid overcome his protective instincts to support their daughter's choice, witnessing the tears of parents who suddenly had hope for their own children, Margaret understood they'd made the right decision. This wasn't exploitation, it was transformation of private suffering into public good. The unexpected consequence of the Vienna conference was the flood of requests that followed, invitations to speak at other medical events, pleas from families seeking advice, media opportunities ranging from medical documentaries to human interest features. We can't possibly do all of this, Khalid said, overwhelmed by the scope of the response, and I won't let our family be consumed by constant public exposure. But Margaret, I also don't want to slam the door on people who are desperately seeking hope. Together, they developed a strategic approach. select participation in truly significant medical education opportunities, a foundation established to fund research into pediatric cortical visual impairment, and a carefully curated set of resources they made publicly available for families navigating similar diagnoses. Margaret found herself in an unexpected new role. Not just wife and stepmother, but advocate and educator on a global scale, using her professional background to develop materials that empowered parents and informed medical professionals. The work was fulfilling in ways she hadn't anticipated, connecting her previous career with her current life, giving purpose that extended beyond their immediate family. "You're remarkable," Khalid told her one evening as she finalized a presentation for Johns Hopkins. "You took a position as a specialized nanny and transformed it into a mission that's literally changing lives across continents. Do you have any idea how extraordinary you are?" Margaret laughed, simultaneously pleased and embarrassed. "I'm just doing what teachers do, taking what I know and finding ways to share it with people who need it. The extraordinary part is that I get to do this work alongside you, with your support and Layla's courage making it possible. We're a team, Khalid. That's what makes it work." The first anniversary of their marriage arrived with a mixture of celebration and reflection. The year had been transformative for everyone. Layla had fully adapted to her vision, starting school in a program for gifted students where her unique perspective and sharp intelligence made her both popular and academically successful. Khalid had gradually shifted more of his business responsibilities to trusted executives, choosing to prioritize family time and the foundation work. Margaret had found a new identity that honored her past while embracing her present. Her children and grandchildren now regular visitors to Dubai, their lives enriched by this expanded, cross-cultural family. As they prepared for an anniversary dinner, just the two of them, with Amina happily overseeing Layla's evening, Margaret found herself in their bedroom, reviewing the year through photographs and memories, overwhelmed by how much had changed since she'd arrived with that worn leather suitcase, uncertain and seeking only purpose. "A penny for your thoughts," Khalid said, emerging from his dressing room in the casual linen pants and shirt he now favored for private evenings, his formal business attire relegated to increasingly rare, necessary occasions. "Or should I offer a dirham? I want to honor local currency in my metaphors." Margaret laughed at his terrible joke, another thing she'd grown to love about this man, his willingness to be silly, to not take himself too seriously, despite his wealth and position. "I'm thinking about second chances," she said honestly, "about how we both thought our best years were behind us, that we'd had our great loves and the rest of life was just gentle decline toward the end. And then this," she gestured around the room, but really meaning everything their life had become, "this explosion of joy and purpose and family and love. It almost seems unfair, like we're somehow getting more than our share of happiness." Khalid crossed to her, taking her hands and pulling her to her feet, bringing her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "I think we're getting exactly what we have the courage to accept. Many people in our position would have chosen safety over risk, would have let grief or caution or social convention prevent them from reaching for this. We chose differently. We chose bravely. That's not unfair. It's simply the reward of being willing to try." He paused, then smiled with that warm intensity that still made her heart skip. "Also, I'd argue that our best years aren't behind us at all. They're right now. Every single day we wake up together, every dinner with Layla where she shows us something new she's discovered, every quiet evening like this where we simply exist together. These are the best years, Margaret. We're living them right now." The anniversary dinner was perfect in its simplicity. A private table on the terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens. Food, prepared by their favorite chef, who'd learned to blend Margaret's New England comfort food preferences with traditional Middle Eastern flavors, a string quartet playing softly in the background. They talked about everything and nothing: Layla's latest school adventure, the Foundation's growing impact, plans for visiting Margaret's family in Boston over the summer, Khalid's idea of finally taking that delayed honeymoon, perhaps to Italy or Greece, destinations they could explore together. "I have something for you," Khalid said as dessert arrived, pulling out a small wrap box. "It's not flashy or expensive by our current standards, but it has meaning, and I hope you'll understand why." Margaret opened it to find a simple compass, old and worn, clearly an antique. Puzzled, she looked up to find him smiling with that slightly nervous expression he wore when sharing something deeply personal. This belonged to my grandfather, who gave it to my father, who gave it to me when I left home for university. It's meant to remind the bearer that no matter how far you travel or how lost you feel, you can always find your way home. I'm giving it to you because, Margaret, you are my home now. Not this estate, not Dubai, not any place, but you. Wherever you are, that's where I want to be. And I wanted you to know that you've always been able to find your way. You found your way to us, found your way through grief to joy, found your way into our hearts, and made us whole. This compass is just a symbol, but the truth it represents is everything to me. Margaret held the compass in her palm, feeling the weight of generations and love and commitment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Khalid, this is the most meaningful gift anyone has ever given me. And you're right, the symbol matters because of what it represents. I was lost when I came here, wandering through grief and wondering if purpose was enough to sustain the rest of my life. You and Layla didn't just give me direction, you gave me home, family, love, meaning. You gave me reasons to wake up joyful instead of just resigned. This compass goes both ways though. You're my home too. Wherever you are, however our life unfolds, I want to be there building and growing and choosing happiness together. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped across the table, the night air fragrant with jasmine and possibility, two people who'd found each other late in life and chosen to make every moment count. As they stood to leave, Khalid pulled her into a slow dance to music only they could hear, and Margaret thought about the unlikely journey that had brought them here. From a job posting to a medical breakthrough to a love that defied cultural boundaries and age expectations. Thank you for taking a chance on me, she whispered against his shoulder. Thank you for teaching me that it's never too late to begin again. His arms tightened around her. No, Habibti, thank you for showing me that miracles come in unexpected packages, that love is ageless, that family is what we create rather than what we're given. You've made my life immeasurably better, and I promise to spend every remaining day proving that you made the right choice. And as they swayed together under the Dubai stars, both understood that that this was exactly where they were meant to be, exactly who they were meant to become, exactly the family they'd all needed without knowing to hope for it. 5 years after their wedding, the Al-Rashid family had settled into a rhythm that balanced public advocacy with private joy, professional achievement with family intimacy, cross-cultural complexity with hard-won harmony. Layla, now 9 years old, had become something of a celebrity in pediatric ophthalmology circles. Her case study had been published in multiple medical journals, and the foundation bearing her name had funded research that helped dozens of other children regain or develop functional vision. But to Margaret and Khalid, she was simply their daughter, brilliant, curious, occasionally mischievous, completely loved. They stood together in the newly expanded Visual Discovery Center, which had been transformed from a personal medical facility into a research and treatment center serving families from across the Middle East and beyond, watching through one-way glass as Layla led a tour for a group of newly diagnosed children and their parents, explaining with matter-of-fact kindness what the treatment process felt like, what they might expect, what she remembered from her own journey from darkness to sight. "She's extraordinary," Margaret murmured, watching their daughter comfort a terrified 6-year-old with the kind of empathy that comes from lived experience. Not despite what she's been through, but because of it. She's learned that challenges can become sources of strength, that vulnerability is nothing to hide, that her story has value beyond just her own experience. Khalid's arm slipped around Margaret's waist, a gesture so familiar after years of marriage that it felt like breathing. "She learned that from watching you," he said. "The way you transformed your grief into purpose, your professional expertise into advocacy, your personal happiness into a foundation that helps others build their own. You taught her taught all of us that our experiences, even the painful ones, can be seeds for something beautiful if we have the courage to plant them and the patience to nurture them. They stood in comfortable silence, this couple who'd found each other in the midst of crisis and had chosen day after day to build something extraordinary. Margaret thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived at this estate, widowed, seeking purpose, professional but lonely, certain her romantic life had ended with Thomas's death. That woman would barely recognize her current self, married to a man from a completely different culture, stepmother to a child she loved as fiercely as her own biological children, co-founder of a foundation changing lives across continents, living in luxury but finding joy in simple family moments, fluent in Arabic despite starting lessons at 62, comfortable navigating both Boston and Dubai, American and Arab contexts, teaching and advocacy, professional expertise and grandmother's wisdom. The transformation had been complete, not because she'd become someone different, but because she'd become more fully herself. "I have something to tell you," Khalid said, his voice carrying that particular tone that indicated significant news. "The board of directors unanimously voted to offer you the position of executive director of the Al-Rashid Foundation for Pediatric Vision Research. It comes with a significant salary, full autonomy over research, priorities, and international recognition as a leader in the field. They believe, as do I, that your combination of educational expertise, personal connection to the mission, and proven ability to bridge medical and family perspectives makes you uniquely qualified." He paused, turning to face her fully. "But Margaret, I need you to know this isn't nepotism or my influence. The board made this decision based purely on your credentials and accomplishments. I've recused myself from foundation leadership decisions to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. This is yours because you've earned it, because you're the best person for the position, because your vision, pun intended, for helping families navigate these diagnoses is exactly what the organization needs. What do you say?" Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming recognition of how far she'd come, how much she'd built, how completely her life had transformed from isolated grief to expansive purpose. "I say yes. I say thank you. I say that coming to Dubai as Layla's nanny was the best professional decision I ever made, and marrying you was the best personal decision, and choosing to stay, to build this life, to take risks despite fear, all of that led here to this moment, to this offer that represents everything I've worked toward without even knowing I was working toward it." That evening, they celebrated with family dinner, a tradition that now included Margaret's children via video call when they couldn't be physically present. Amina presiding over the table with benevolent authority, Layla chattering about her day, the staff who'd become part of their extended family joining for dessert and coffee. As Margaret looked around the table, at Khalid, her partner in every sense of the word, at Layla, the daughter of her heart, at Amina, the mother-in-law who'd become a genuine friend, at the faces on the screen representing her, American family who'd embraced this unexpected chapter, she felt a profound sense of completion, not the completion of ending, but the completion of wholeness, of pieces fitting together in ways she couldn't have designed or predicted, but which felt absolutely right. "I want to make a toast," she said, raising her glass, "to second chances, to love that comes when we've stopped looking for it, to families we build rather than just the ones we're born into, to the courage to say yes when life offers unexpected opportunities, to Layla, who brought us all together, and to Khalid, who showed me that hearts can be both broken and whole, that grief and joy can coexist, that it's never too late to choose happiness. May we continue to choose it every single day, for as long as we're blessed to be together." The responses came in multiple languages: Inshallah, Amen, here, but they all meant the same thing: affirmation, gratitude, commitment to the extraordinary, ordinary life they'd built together. As the evening wound down and Layla was tucked into bed, as Amina retired to her wing with satisfied smiles, as the household settled into peaceful quiet, Margaret and Khalid found themselves once again in their favorite spot in the garden, the place where he'd first proposed, where they'd had countless conversations about dreams and fears and possibilities. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, the question surprising her. "Leaving Boston, your old life, everything familiar?" Margaret considered the question seriously, wanting to give him an honest answer. "I miss things. My kids being close, familiar seasons, the comfort of contexts I understood instinctively. But regret? Never. Not for a single moment. Because, Khalid, this life we've built isn't better or worse than my old life. It's simply richer, more complex, more challenging, more rewarding, more surprising, more filled with love and purpose and joy than I ever thought possible after 60. You gave me that. Layla gave me that. This extraordinary, impossible, wonderful family we've created gave me that. So no, Habibti, no regrets, only gratitude." He pulled her close, and they stood wrapped in each other's arms under the Dubai stars. Two people who'd found each other late in life and had chosen, courageously and consistently, to build something beautiful. Not just a marriage, not just a family, but a testament to the enduring truth that it's never too late for transformation, never too late for love, never too late to discover that the best chapters of life might still be waiting to be written.